Happy holidays! I hope you're having fun in this most wonderful time of the year. Me, unfortunately, I can't yet because I chose to torture myself with this nightmare of a comic. Anyway, Spider-Man X-Men Dark Web, published last year and written by co-authors Jerry Duggan and Zeb Wells. Spider-Man X-Men Dark Web was supposed to be Zeb Wells' first big event in his Spider-Man run, but instead it ended up in the honorable mentions of my top 5 most disappointing comics in 2022. Why wasn't only in the honorable mentions? Well, I'll let this freak explain.
Not gonna lie, I'm really tempted to put it on the list, but the story isn't done yet.
Though looking back, I'm starting to think that I should have made this an exception. Why? Well, let's not stall any further and tear the band-aid off and discuss Spider-Man X-Men Dark Web. And spare the horrors of reading the story yourself. Warning, spoilers. Our story begins with Ben and Janine having a falling out, something I actually mentioned in the Hallows Eve review, where she decides that she no longer wants any part in what Ben is doing and is scared of what he's becoming. But she comes back after getting a vague threat from a guy who's connected by somebody. They still never make that clear. But yeah, it's enough for her to pull a 180 and come back. I'm not sure how Wells want us to read this scene because the context sounds negative with her coming back to what is essentially a toxic relationship, borderlining on codependency, but plays off as a romantic moment. Anyway, after that, Ben shows how creepy he can be by stalking Peter. Well, it would be creepy if it weren't for the fact that Peter's already doing that right now. He really is the perfect clone. And he shows off his perfection as Gus, a debt collector who's been hounding Peter since the beginning of this run because he didn't pay his hospital bills after the events of the Beyond storyline, mistakes him for Peter. Ben is pissed off and walks away as Gus swears he'll collect. After the encounter, Ben and Janine consider their next move to get revenge on Peter, and once more, to prove he really is the perfect copy, they get demonic help and use their stolen resources to transport them into Limbo. As for how they did that, well, apparently they got a sample, but that's kind of it. That's all the explanation they give us. I mean, there is one scene where Madeline tells them that Limbo tends to draw people who feel lost and searching for purpose, but they don't really fully dive into what that really means. Speaking of, once she meets the dear couple, she immediately grows a liking to them, like to a point where she actually lets them live with her, having dinner, coming up with evil schemes, gives Janine her not well thought out powers as Hallows Eve, and confiding in their desires. Turns out what Madeline wants is something that she lost way back in X-Men Inferno, as when she fought Jean, it resulted with her actually transferring her memories to her. And unfortunately, they're memories of some of her most treasured moments, specifically the early memories of her and her son. It didn't help that Jean ended up raising her son, pretty much taking her place as his mother, and now at the time, a teenage Cable now living with Jean Scott really didn't help. So she wants those memories too. How she planned to get them along with Peter's for Ben? Well, that's where Gus comes in. Ben kidnaps him and uses him as a guinea pig for their plan. And oh boy, remember when I said in my last Zeb Wells video their plan had some Soul Eater wannabe bullshit? Well, here it is. So apparently there is a special fruit in Limbo that once someone eats it, it makes it possible to steal their soul, which yes, looks very familiar, and yes, the next step to it is to also eat the soul, so to gain all their spiritual energy, and yeah, whatever, it's like from Soul Eater. Though the big factor here is that it does give them their memories. Fast forward to the holiday season, where we see our respective heroes celebrating the holidays with the X-Men, who here consist of Cyclops, Jean, Havoc, Iceman, Firestar, and Forge, trying to have a night on the town, while Peter and MJ take a break being jackasses. That was just for a second, to celebrate the birthday of their late friend Harry Osborn, as he died at the end of Spencer's run, and I'll admit this moment is actually pretty decent, with Peter and MJ just trying to remember their dead friend, and Norman, who again, at this time turned into a good guy, just regrets both how he treated Harry as a father and what exactly led to his death. Unfortunately, that didn't last, as the X-Men are attacked by demonic forces that are possessing inanimate objects and attacking the citizens. The X-Men swoop in and deck their halls. Come on, I had to say it. It'd be wrong not to. Meanwhile, Ben, in his Chasm persona, breaks into Oscorp and confronts Norman, where he reminds him of how Norman is the reason all this is happening, with him being the mastermind of the Clone Saga. Norman actually sympathizes with Ben, as again, he's gained a new sense of clarity and wants to at least try to atone. But then Ben goes on to say that he wants to also kill everyone in the deep moment we could have had ended in a fight. Oh, and Venom's here now. This is a good time for me to talk about the tie-ins. Though Dark Web is primarily a Spider-Man X-Men story, there were several tie-ins with the comic, like Miss Marvel, Venom, Mary Jane Black Cat, and Norman Osborn's Gold Goblin mini. Tie-ins that have almost nothing to do with what was going to be happening in the story. Sure, each one starts out with them dealing with the Limbo attack, but each immediately move on to do a completely different story. Granted, these stories are more interesting, but still different stories. Venom's tie-ins have a little bit more to do with this overall story, but more on that in a bit. For now, we got Peter and Ben reuniting. At first, Peter's happy to see him, which should have been Ben's first sign that he's remembering things wrong, but Ben doesn't want to hear anything coming out of Peter's mouth and sticks Venom on him, who is currently brainwashed. If you can tell, Ben's actions by this point was written by Wells. As his side of the story, characters get dumber and dumber. After defeating Venom, Madeline shows up and leaves Peter alone, which is weird because, you know, the whole plan involves them getting Peter and Jean, but okay. We take a break from stupidity though as we jump into the X-Men side of things, and thank God, as Jerry Duggan actually knows how to tell a fun story with these characters. Seriously, we got the X-Men being heroes, trying to figure out ways to defeat the demons and cracking jokes that are actually funny, like the bit with Santa getting eaten by a demonic Christmas tree. And of course, a fun callback to Spider-Man and his amazing friends. It honestly tricked me into thinking that this story would actually get better. Unfortunately, it does not. In fact, the more Duggan goes on, he unintentionally points out how pointless the story is. Madeline did succeed at capturing the X-Men. While Peter and Ben fight, we get the same spiel of, "You won't give me your memories" from Ben, and "You need to listen to me" from Peter, with the occasional moment that Wells thought would be cool, but it just feels cringy or confusing, as apparently the memory goo didn't just alter Ben's mind, but also mutated him, because now he has these new powers like weaponizing his spider sense that shoot out energy spikes and constructs he can use as weapons, which besides never coming back after its introduction, makes no sense because the goo is made to just alter your memories, not your biology. At first I thought it was gonna lead to some big reveal that the goo is some form of symbiote, because apparently it also gave Ben his new suit, but nope. As I said in part 1, the goo seemed to do whatever Zebwell wanted to do. Whatever. Ben gets the upper hand, as it turns out that while they were fighting, J. Jonah Jameson and Robbie Robinson were kidnapped and taken to Limbo. Peter has no choice but to agree to Ben's terms, and he heads to Limbo, where he immediately has Peter eat the fruit in the store, or have Peter, Jonah, and Robbie be forced to live in Limbo's version of New York for several days. Okay, I'll explain why that's stupid later, but let's talk about something that isn't completely ridiculous. Surprisingly, as we see what Madeline's been doing with the X-Men, where we get a powerful moment of Madeline just explaining how empty and incomplete she feels by not having those memories anymore, missing the paternal love that she had, and Havoc trying to reach out, but she's reluctant to stop her side of the plan as she's manipulated Jean by putting her in her own illusions, only for her to break free last minute. And mind you, we still get some funny moments like Scott being forced to keep his eyes closed and not use his optic blast because Madeline hung cute puppies around him. Again, Duggan for the win on balancing comedy and drama. Back with Peter in the Limbo version of New York, it seems Ben's plan is to make Peter experience his worst hell, which is working at the Daily Bugle for Jonah. The problem is, 1, Peter hasn't worked for Jonah or the Bugle in years. 2, Jonah and him are actually friends now since Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 6 in 2017. And 3, this plan is stupid as hell since the demons don't seem to be doing anything. They just seem to be forced to act like humans, which seems to be torture for them as they try to kill a smaller demon who was trying to play along, but Peter saves him, which leads to him admiring Peter, and we learn that this is being done because Peter has to be willing to eat the fruit for it to work. Okay, except you already established that he doesn't, since I'm guessing Gus didn't want to eat weird demon fruit. Also, in regards to him replicating Peter's early days, I know some people are gonna say, well, of course Ben lost some memory, but he's been stalking Peter for months. He should know by this point that this isn't gonna really do much for him. I'll get more into it when we talk about characters, but how exactly can he even recall this? Given Beyond erased a good chunk of his early memories to the point where he abandoned MJ, he shouldn't really know about this. Meanwhile, Peter is able to save Jonah from getting screwed by his bed. You know, if Duggan was writing this, he'd actually find a way to make this funny, but Wells just makes it creepy. I mean, I know it's meant to be a joke, but the problem is there is no punchline. Ben is in the process of creating his own Sinister Six, made up of demons in Limbo called the Insidious Six, which is meant to be a fun callback to Spider-Man the animated series, but by this point, you even care? And that demon Peter saved volunteers to be the Spider-Man, but Ben kicks him out, and the demon runs to his older brother, who got a symbiote from Venom right before this storyline started in his solo series, and combines it with his alchemy to make it... Honestly, it's unclear as what exactly he did. He just kind of threw his brother's Spider-Man outfit and fused with the symbiote, and that fusion bonds with the demon's brother, creating a superhero named Wreck-Rap. Now, you're probably thinking, that sounds random as hell. Well, it is. Meanwhile, Jean and Madeline start fighting, and it's pretty even as Jean seems to be able to counter all of Madeline's attacks. Though, when it does look like Jean is about to win, she actually surrenders. Jean actually agreeing and sympathizing with Madeline and actually uses her powers to transfer her memories of Nathan back to her. Yes, and that's when I realized none of this story had to happen. The fruit, the attack, the demonic city, none of it. Madeline literally has all of Jean's powers and then some. She could easily just do what Jean did for her to Ben. I mean, this whole side story does what the others should have been. Why did Ben need to think Peter ruined his life? Why does he need to be a villain? We could have had an interesting story of Ben trying to find himself, where instead of being completely insane, he could be questioning whether or not he truly is meant to be a hero, or was everything just programmed into him? Nature versus nurture. You could still have the conflict of Madeline being reluctant to trust Jean after all that she's been through, but have the ending still be the same. Madeline does get what she wants, and then she decides that she's being unfair to Ben and gives him his memories back. But Ben chooses not to take it because he decides that he is no longer going to be bound by someone else's past, and instead he will carve his own future. Sure, it's a bit of a retread since we've seen that before in past stories with Ben, but it'd be better than this. Instead, we got Ben just being a complete and total maniac, to the point where the instant she tells Ben what they're doing is wrong and tries to explain what happened, he just whines about being betrayed and heads out. Not long after, Hallows Eve, probably forgot she was even in this story, shows up, steals her scythe, which contains all her limbo powers, and gives it to Ben, giving him a demonic makeover and power over the army of Limbo. Him and his Insidious Six attacks New York, leading to this big fight where both Spider-Man, the X-Men, Madeline, and all the heroes who had tie-ins join together to fight him. We get a long, drawn-out fight, ending with Ben being defeated, Madeline getting her scythe back, and ordering the forces of Limbo to return. Hallows Eve escapes, however, so she could have a solo miniseries. Ben would be in prison, and Peter offers to still help Ben, but he won't listen. Peter, you got psychics on your side right now? One who literally did what Ben wants? Not gonna even... The story ends with Madeline revealing that she has decided to make Limbo public, as Limbo is supposed to be a place for people who find themselves unwanted and lost, and believes being in the light will be better than healing in the shadows. Not sure if she really thought this through, but whatever, the story's over. This was just a definition of tonal whiplash, but yeah, to sum it up, it's crap. While his Dead Language story just felt like a mean-spirited, insulted mess, this felt like a confusing and desperate mess. It's also very clear that Wells and Duggan only did the bare minimum when it comes to collaboration. 50% of the time I felt like I was reading two separate stories and not one big story with Spider-Man the X-Men, who despite being promoted as a big crossover story with them, they barely team up. Once during the first fight of the X-Men side of the story, and then the end. I can't even find out why Wells wanted to do this story, but unlike Dead Language, where you can argue that that was an obligation, this was something he clearly planned out since Beyond. At first I thought Wells wanted to do this to be kind of a satire of 90s comics, but it's played too straight. Then I thought it was supposed to be a homage to Inferno, but besides a dream sequence that parallels one from the book, everything else doesn't match, as that was more of a horror story, and this was attempting to be a dark comedy. So bottom line, this was nonsense. Next we move on to characters, starting with my least favorite web slinger for way too long, Peter Parker. He's not the worst thing in this story. In fact, his stupidity is toned down a bit, where he almost feels heroic. Hell, under Duggan, he actually cracks jokes that are actually funny. However, toned down doesn't mean he's still not making stupid moves, like earlier mentioning not considering asking Jean or Madeline to use their powers to help Ben, or when he actually forgot who Madeline was despite mentioning her before. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there isn't much to say about Peter except he wasn't the worst thing in this story, which is kind of a win. Then we got the X-Men. I'll cover the whole team as it saves time, and honestly what they do is more focused as a team effort. Plus some like Firestar, Iceman, and Forge don't really have big arcs in this story, but we still get some fun moments with them, like Iceman and Firestar teaming up with Peter, and the ways Forge actually figured out out how to defeat the demons, though also struggling as people, no matter what era in X-Men, will always hate on the mutants, even if they save them. As for Jean, Magic, and Havoc, they have more personal dogs in this fight, with Jean, of course, having to deal with Madeline wanting her memories. Magic, who thanks to her experiences tries to figure out how to deal with the forces of Limbo, and Havoc, who is still desperate to help her since, unlike Scott, feels responsible for what's going on right now, while Scott tries to not accidentally shoot puppies. Okay, he has less to do, but still. This team is the best part of the story, as they show how it can be both fun to be a hero, but also the toughest part of it, and how you don't always need to throw a punch, or in some cases, rocks, to take down the bad guy. It was very nice. Next, we got the Goblin Queen herself, Madeline Pryor, who for a good chunk of the story is pretty decent when it comes to being an antagonist, with her motivations being sympathetic, though you kind of wonder after the last story arc why she insisted on this whole attack, since her and Magic were on good terms, and though her and Krakoa were on shaky ground, Havoc did actually help her out, and Jean probably had no problem talking to her in the first place. Of course, this is more of a Zeb Wells contribution to her character, especially in the end where she somehow lets Eve overpower her and lose her control over Limbo, which makes no sense since she gave Eve her powers in the first place, but whatever. Luckily, most of her story arc is under Duggan, who did a good job making her arc feel natural and not all a nightmare for fans. That dishonor goes to Ben Reilly, aka Chasm, aka every edgelord's wet dream. This character is hell to read. It's like Wells channeled all the idiocracies we would get in bad language into one character. His plan makes no sense. His motivations are even more confusing the more you read. As he said, he wants his memories back, but each time he has a chance to do so, he just kind of does some really stupid crap on the side, like the demonic New York or the Insidious Six, or overthrowing Madeline. Everything he says is nonsense about how Peter betrayed him, or how he is so much stronger, but he's also angry at others because of the mistreatment they did to him in the past, despite the fact that, I don't know, 50% of his memory should be gone. Again, Wells never specifies how much of Ben's memories are gone. Like, in Beyond, at one point, Ben actually forgot he was a clone, and also lost a good chunk of memories regarding him and Peter, and even Uncle Ben. So, again, how does he know this stuff? But whatever, I'm beating a dead horse. My point is, Ben was the worst part of this story, and I definitely see his fans wanting to erase this memory. As for other characters, they're just to promote tie-ins or be comic relief. As mentioned, most of the characters kind of went on to do their own thing, with the only character really having more impact being Venom, as he unknowingly assisted in the creation of Wreck Rap, but even then, that's pretty loose. As for Wreck Rap, he's just a more annoying version of Spider-Man 2099's villain Flipside, and that's it. What about Hallows' Eve? She's just there to be Ben's right hand and sadly be codependent to him. And yeah, I don't have anything to say about Jonah and Robbie, who didn't even need to be in this crossover. The art varies on the issues, as we do get different artists, but overall, they're all fine. I do think Ed McGuinness, who did the Spider-Man stuff, was probably the best, as you can tell he just had a lot of fun designing the monsters. And if I had to say who the weakest was, I'd say that'd be Mitchell Dowling, and it's kind of the same reason for Hallows' Eve. Dull expressions and colors. So yeah, that's Spider-Man X-Men Dark Web, a comic that was the beginning of the end for many Peter Parker readers and the scourge of Ben Reilly fans. Despite praising Jerry Duggan for his contribution to this story, I'd say skip it. This is definitely a holiday special that is on my naughty list. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna take a break and go to Disneyland. What about I'll do some Disney minis and some reviews after?